Hello, and welcome everyone to a new series on critical reasoning, which I'll be taking throughout this academic session. So, this is for CLAT and AILET aspirants. So, this is the broad outline for today's session. So, an overview of the current section, critical reasoning forms 20% of the current weightage of the CLAT paper. But if you take into account English and legal reasoning, if you know critical reasoning, it will definitely 100% help you with the other sections as well. As of now, 24 questions come in the critical reasoning section, with each set having 6 questions. Approximately, you should ideally be spending 30 to 35 minutes on critical reasoning section. And if you're done within that, well and good. The typical structure of a critical reasoning question is broken down into 3 things. This is how the critical reasoning question will appear in the question paper of your CLAT paper. So this part, a big passage will come. This is called the stimulus. So you'll have to read through this passage. Then on the basis of that, there will be 6 questions. This initial part, that based on the information provided, which of the following is a potential root cause of the decline in production efficiency? This part becomes the question stem. And then the options are there. It is a golden rule in critical reasoning and most people don't adhere to it. Always attempt the easiest questions and the easiest reading comprehensions first. Don't try to prove your skill in critical reasoning and get as many marks as possible. Now, there is a difference between CLAT and AILET. AILET questions for reasoning are a bit shorter, especially those pertaining to the critical reasoning section. And for CLAT, you'll have bigger passages on the basis of which there'll be multiple questions from a single passage. So what I would recommend, whenever you are practicing, you make the AILET questions the basis of the CLAT questions. So there will be short assumption, inference, conclusion, etc. questions. So you can make that the basis. Then for AILET, with regard to reasoning, there are additional topics as well, like arrangements, directions, coding, family trees, etc., which we'll be dealing with later. But that's a part which doesn't form a part of critical reasoning. So for AILET, you'll have to study these topics separately. Now let's straight away get into it. What is critical reasoning? So the very first distinction which you 100% need to know and get it to the bottom of your mind is the difference between fact versus an opinion. Pause the video and just go through these statements. So the first one, Indians love Bollywood. You are an Indian. You also love Bollywood. Now, Indians love Bollywood in itself is a subjective statement or it's an opinion. You are an Indian. So in this case, the author which has written this particular statement is talking about some person. You are an Indian. And therefore, the author, based on these two statements, one of which is his opinion, and the second one, which might be a fact, is coming to a conclusion that you also love Bollywood. Now, this part is a subjective part. It's not certain. On the basis of these two statements, he's trying to get to this part that you also love Bollywood, but that may or may not be true. However, when we read these next two statements, the first of which is Dangal is the highest internationally grossing Indian movie ever made. That's a fact. Dangal earned a certain amount of money, and on the basis of that, we can easily compare everything and arrive at the decision that Dangal was the highest ever grossing movie in Bollywood. The second statement, Indian film industry produces these many films per year. This statement again can be taken from any newspaper article, any research report, etc., and can be easily verified as to how many movies were produced. Now, in the first case, the author is expressing an opinion. First, that Indians love Bollywood, and second, that you also love Bollywood. Now, this part, the author is inferring on the basis of these two statements. Now, when something like this happens, when the author makes an opinion or a judgment and arrives at a conclusion, that particular set of statements is called an argument. Now, you might have heard argument in a typical sense of two people fighting with each other, but that's not how we interpret argument in terms of critical reasoning. An argument requires a conclusion which is based on the opinion or judgment of the author, and it follows from one or more reasons. So in this case, the reasons were Indians love Bollywood, you are an Indian, and therefore you also love Bollywood. Yeah. So now, the second most common term that you'll be hearing in critical reasoning is the premise. What is exactly a premise? It is the basis on which the conclusion is drawn. So if you go back to this case, these two statements are the basis on which the author is arriving at the third statement, which is you also love Bollywood. So now these two statements would become the premises for arriving at the conclusion. Whenever you have to find the premise in any particular argument, you always ask the question, why should a conclusion be accepted? The reasons for accepting the conclusion become the premises. These are some common indicators that you can look at while reading the paragraph of questions or the shorter form of questions, but don't accept these particular words as golden rules of them being premise or conclusion indicators. It can vary. So here's a short quiz which you can take on just determining what is the premise in these four statements and what is the conclusion. So just pause the video for a while and you can attempt the quiz on your own. Now, the answers to the questions would be in the first statement, this part, a lot of people have died in wars between India and Pakistan, becomes the premise, and therefore we must end all animosity, become the conclusion. The conclusion indicator here was therefore. Now the second statement, the price of petrol is rising due to the Russia-Ukraine dispute. So whenever this due to comes, this becomes the premise, and through this premise we are concluding that the price of petrol is rising. So this becomes the conclusion. In the third statement, India should be better at football owing to one of the highest populations in the world. So again, owing to is one of the lesser used premise indicators, but still the answer for the premise would be this, owing to one of the highest populations in the world, and the initial part would be the conclusion. Now the last statement is somewhat tricky because although the statement starts with therefore, however, the conclusion that the author wants to arrive at is this, and that they move to the village. And the basis on which the author is saying that the people have moved to the village is because of the rising costs. So the rising costs in this case would be the premise. So in this session, we have looked at what does the CR section look like in the CLAT paper, what is an argument, what is a premise, and what is the conclusion. And we'll be dealing with the other aspects of CR in future lessons. Thank you.